Good evening. I want to take just a second and maybe echo a little bit of what Brian was saying, why this is important. Because a lot of times when you talk about marriage, there seems like in churches there's just this subset of people who go, yeah, we really want to talk about this, we want to hear about this. And that's usually couples maybe who are somewhere between newlywed and their kids being pre-middle school age. But I want to tell you that I think it is absolutely essential that we talk about marriage and healthy marriage within our churches. You guys can see in our culture around us that marriage is suffering. And I'm not saying that as any kind of judgment on anyone. I don't know you. I don't know your circumstance. I know there are people in here who have been married for many, many years. I know there are people in here who are married again. I know there are people in here who are single or maybe single again. People who may not quite yet be to the age of getting married. But when we, as a church, as the body of Christ, support healthy marriage, it is good for stability in our congregations. It's good for stability in our communities. And, a lot of times older couples can kind of look at this stuff and go, well, we've been married 60 years and we're doing pretty good. So why do I need this? Well, I'm going to tell you, those of you who are older, intentionality, okay? First of all, you never quit discovering your spouse. Because as you go through life, you grow, you change. And you never quit discovering your spouse. That is the exciting part about marriage to me. I've been married 23 years, and every now and again, my wife will say something, and I will think, I never would have in a million years thought that would have come out of your mouth. But she's not the same as she was when we got married. She's grown, she's changed, she's had life experiences, we had experiences together. Or maybe she'll share a story with me from childhood about how she got that little scar on her elbow. And I'm like, wow, I've never heard that before. So to me, that discovery is so exciting. But being intentional is essential for healthy relationships, whether you've been married 1 year or you've been married 60, 70 years, okay? You guys have probably all heard the old joke about the lady, and she and her husband had been married for 60 years, and she was really discouraged because in 60 years, she couldn't ever remember him saying, I love you. And so she went to him and she said, how come you don't tell me I love you on a regular basis? And he said, well, I told you that the day we got married, and if I ever change my mind, I'll tell you. Intentionality. It is important for husbands and wives to be intentional toward each other so that we don't wind up going on cruise control, okay? That's so much of what I see in the counseling room are couples who went on cruise control. And once they went on cruise control, they started drifting apart and never realized it. So it is essential that we be intentional in our marriage relationships, okay? Also, another thing that's really important is influence, okay? You older couples, I promise you that there are younger couples who are looking at you and they are saying either, wow, that is exactly what I want us to be like. Or they are looking at you and going, wow, I hope we never get there. Be the couple that they're saying, wow, that's what I want to be. Okay? That's really, really important, again, within this community. You know, you look at the research now. For those of you who've been married 50 years and more, you will very quickly become the anomaly in our society because of the increasing divorce rates and because the age of getting married is getting older and older. So you're going to be an anomaly. Barna did some research a few years ago of young people, millennials, that age group. And in this research, the most fascinating thing to me was this statement where of the people polled, a large percentage of them said that they desperately wanted a marriage like their grandparents have. But they do not believe it is possible in today's culture. Isn't that sad? Influence. The fact that you're here is saying something to somebody else in here, okay? All right. I want to start off just looking at a few passages of Scripture, and let me make sure I'm turned on here. Okay. Before we do that, I do want to read my disclaimer again, and I did this last week, but I'm going to do this every week because I do think it's important. Throughout our time together today, we're going to look at information on facilitating healthy, Christ-centered marriages. This is not intended to be a professional counseling session and will not address extreme addictions, abuse, or other forms of marital conflict that require professional clinical counseling. If there's conflict in your relationship that presents danger to your well-being, physically, mentally, emotionally, or in any way, or if you live in a state of fear due to conflict, you need to seek immediate professional and protective help. And if that fits you in any way, you can come confidentially talk to me afterwards. Now, don't think everybody who comes and talks to me, they're having problems, okay? Because I'm going to be talking to a lot of people afterwards. But don't play around with that, okay? Protect yourself. Do not play around with that. I want to start off looking at some scriptures. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 29. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is useful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Psalm 25:11. A word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. In James chapter 1, 19 through 21 and 26. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For a person's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Now listen to this part, verse 26. If you consider yourself religious and do not keep a tight rein on your tongue, you deceive yourself, and your religion is worthless. What I want us to talk about tonight is healthy communication in marriage. Because what makes a relationship healthy is having good, healthy communication in it. And do you know what the 5 most dreaded words in the world are? The 5 most dreaded words in the world. Honey, we need to talk. Because that is never, ever, ever followed by anything good, right? Honey, we need to talk. You are the best cook in the world, and I love what you do. Honey, we need to talk. I just wanted to let you know that I really like this budget that you showed me, and I think we're going to do this great. No, it never happens like that. There's always that dread with it. Communication is a difficult process, even in the best of circumstances. And I hope that you have great communication with your spouse. But I'm going to tell you that research says the number one conflict between spouses is money. But I'm going to tell you that what I see in my office every day, every week, over and over and over again, when couples come in and I ask them, why are you here? You know what they say? Communication. We can't talk. We're not communicating. We're hitting a wall when we're trying to talk with each other. Going back to what we talked about last week very quickly with the 10 axioms that create safety in a relationship. And remember, when a relationship is safe, that's where it's healthy. The 4th and 5th axioms that we talked about last week, the 4th one was we all have an innate need to feel heard, because when you have a voice, you have value. You have that inborn need to feel heard. It is part of who you are spiritually. It's part of the way that God made you. And that gives you value in the relationship. And then the 5th one, without communication, a relationship will die. Those are, they're just given. They're foundational statements that are true and are going to be true every single time when you look at your relationship. Now, let's talk a little bit just about communication, some of the things that work into good and bad communication, and how we, really this is more about how we process communication. Because the reality is, the reason that most spouses, couples come into my office and say we can't communicate, it's not that they can't communicate. They both know how to talk. They both know how to listen. But the way they process communication is where they miss each other. And so let's talk a little bit about processing communication. All right, the first thing is what we just talked about. We do all have that innate need to feel heard. And we have to recognize in our spouse that that is a basic need, that we cannot be dismissive of our spouse and act like what they have to say is not important or that it doesn't matter. It does matter, okay? Whether that's small talk or whether that's something deeply personal to them. Hearing them matters because we're communicating to them, you mean something to me. You are valuable to me. And the biggest mistake that most people make, I said this last week, I want to say it again though, the biggest mistake that most people make though, where they kind of miss each other in this, is the false belief that you have only heard me when you agree with me. Okay? I can hear you and still not agree with you. I can still validate you and your opinion and your belief and where you're coming from and what your experiences are, but not agree with you. So, how do you do that? How do you do that? You take the time to attentively listen and you take the time to hear what's underneath, okay? Most of the time when we're talking about communication, a lot of people are really good at, okay, I can listen and parrot back to you what you said to me. I mean, I can repeat it back, so can a parrot, right? But what I've got to do is communicate back to you that I understand the emotion that's underneath that. Whether I agree with you or not, I know you're deeply convicted about this or this is important to you because this is what you're feeling, all right? And so for those of you who are not good emotional communicators, this is where you're going to have to stretch yourself a little bit. And you're going to have to listen for what the person's feeling, not just the factual, rational information. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Next thing, what does it mean to be heard? Well, that's what we just said. Okay. And in doing that, what we do is we communicate that the person is understood and that they're valued. All right. Next thing. There are 3 things that happen in every communication. Okay? And they happen over and over and over 1,000 times through the day. And the 3 things that happen in every communication is first, what is said. And that is literally, what does my brain tell my mouth to speak? And my brain can tell my mouth to speak words of blessing and encouragement and goodness. My brain can tell my mouth to speak words of anger that are hateful and abusive. My brain can tell my mouth to speak neutral words like, did you get milk at the store today? But the first thing in that process every time is what is said. Now, the second thing is what is heard. And what I mean by that is when those words travel across the air and they go in my wife's ears, what is she hearing? And what I'm talking about now is literally understanding what's being heard. Have any of you ever had the experience that you and your spouse are in different rooms, but you're talking to each other? And one of you says something and the other one goes, what do you mean there's ninja monkeys in the front yard? I mean, we can literally misunderstand what the other person is saying. Any of you ever had that experience? Yeah, probably all of us who have been married for more than 2 days have had that experience, or those of you maybe who are even dating have had that experience with the person that you're with. So that second step is what is heard. Because if we don't hear correct information, that changes everything, right? We have to hear correct information to process it, work on it in the correct way. Third thing is what's interpreted. Assuming that something is said and something is correctly heard, when I hear it, what am I going to do with that information? Am I going to take that and give my spouse the benefit of the doubt that she's not trying to hurt me, that she's not trying to undermine me, that she's not doing anything other than looking out for my own good? Or am I going to take that hostilely? Or am I going to take that nonchalantly and not give her the affirmation she needs? What am I going to do with that information? How am I going to interpret that and process that? Just to kind of give you a little demonstration of how we can take what's said, what's heard, and what's interpreted. 5 words up here on the screen. He gave her dog biscuits. How many different ways can you read that and interpret it? What do you see there? Yeah, well, yeah, there's no punctuation, but what are some different ways you could hear that? He gave her dog biscuits. What else? He gave her dog biscuits. Anything else you see in there? I did this for a group once, and I put that up there, and this one lady, she said, it's an incomplete sentence. I said, what do you mean? And she said, the dog's name is Biscuits. He gave her dog biscuits. What? That's why communication can be so difficult. Because we can see the same thing but get totally different meanings out of it. If he gave her dog biscuits, wow, that's nice. Loving on the dog, treating it. If he gave her dog biscuits, well, that's pretty demeaning and cruel. Communication's a tough process. Okay, active listening. Research has shown that most people do not listen to what you say past the first sentence. Do you know why? They're already formulating in their mind what they're going to say back, or how they're going to defend themselves, or how they're going to redirect that conversation in another way. In our culture, we are in a culture of sound bites and quick hits. And on a whole in our culture, learning to listen, active, attentive listening is becoming a lost art. But I'm telling you, in good communication, in healthy marriages, you have to listen. Because a lot of times when we fully listen, where the person starts might not always be where they're landing. And so we need to actively, attentively listen. And by the way, there are different things that communicate active listening. And what that is for you, I don't know. For some people, it's when you put the device down. Then I know I've got your attention and you're listening to me. For other people, it's when you're holding my hands. For other people, it's when you're looking in my eyes. For other people, it's when we're on a walk together. But I'm going to tell you, tell your spouse what communicates attentive listening to you, so that when they're communicating with you, you'll know they're communicating with you, okay? That's going to be different for different people. External versus internal processing. Now, this is where a whole lot of couples miss each other, and let me explain this. The best way I know how to explain this is an internal processor is somebody who, when you say something to them, they're going to look at you and go, huh. They've heard what you've said, but what they've got to do is they've got to kind of kick that around in their mind and mull over it and try to figure it out. And they're not going to give you really any outward signs that they're doing that. An external processor, on the other hand, is somebody who has to talk it out. Okay? And so if an external processor is at point A and they want to get to point B, the plane's going to take off at point A, and then it's going to go over here to C. And then it's going to go over here to Q, then it's going to go to J, and then it's going to go to red, and then it's going to go to 4, and about 12 other places before the plane lands at 2. Now, if you and your spouse process in different ways, that can become very, very frustrating. Because when an external processor looks at an internal processor and they tell them something that's important to them, and the internal processor goes, huh. The external processor is sitting there going, you don't even care. I mean, you're not giving me any response. You couldn't care less about this. But when it's flipped and an internal processor goes to an external processor and they tell them something, and the external processor's revving the plane up to take off, well, whatever they say first might not be what they mean yet, because they got to talk it through. But to that internal processor, they're going to go, well, you just said this. But now you're saying this, and now you're saying this, and now you're saying this, and I don't know what to do. I'm all frustrated here. Figuring that out, which way you process, helps in healthy communication, because an internal processor can look at his external processing or her external processing spouse and say, you know what? I appreciate you sharing that information with me. I need some time to think it over. And I'll get back with you in 5 minutes or an hour or tomorrow morning or whatever. And by the way, internal processors, give them a time frame, okay? So that they don't think you're just dismissing it. External processors, what you got to do if your spouse processes differently is you've got to say, look, here's where I'm starting. Now that might not be where I'm going to finish, but what I want to do is I want to spitball and kind of see what sticks. So I need to talk this out loud. Just verbalizing what we're doing makes so much difference in eliminating that frustration. Okay, the next thing is fix it versus vent it mentality. And what I want to do, I want to show you guys a 2-minute video clip that I think illustrates this better than anything, and then we'll talk about it for just a second. So if we can go ahead and pull up the video. It's coming. Nope, that's not it. Wait, that's it. Yep. And you may have seen this before, but this is great. Hit the space bar. That may do it.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Come on, if you would just...
Don't.
Okay, you go ahead and cut it there. Okay. The idea of fix it versus vent it is there are some people in their communication that they want to vent, and that is, I want to talk to you about my feelings. I want to share with you what's going on with me. And it's a great thing, because in doing that, what you're expressing to your spouse is, I want to know you and I want to be known by you. Now, there's other people who communicate primarily from a fix-it standpoint, and that is the person who says, if you are coming to me and you are telling me something, it is because you have a problem and you want my help on fixing it, right? And that also comes from a really good place, because I don't want my spouse to hurt. I don't want my wife to have problems or have difficulties. The key in it is having a balance, because if communication is always vent it, well, that's great. Everybody knows how everybody feels, but there's no positive movement in the relationship to make things better. But if it's all fix it, then eventually one spouse just shuts down because they look at the other and it's like, well, you've always got all the answers, so what am I here for? And so there's got to be a balance of those two within it. Again, recognizing which place you come from more often makes a whole lot of difference if you and your spouse talk about that and you know that, because sometimes you got to say to your spouse, I'm not looking for a solution. I just want you to listen. Other times you need to say to your spouse, help. I need to know how to work through this problem. And again, when we default to these different ways of communicating, the internal, external, the vent it, fix it, these different things, when we default to those, we just expect everybody else communicates the same way, right? Because, that's the way I do it, so that's the right way, right? But verbalizing it, just saying it out loud, makes so much difference. Okay. Timing. In healthy communication, timing is important. Now, I never ever advocate that something goes unsaid that needs to be said. Okay? But if your spouse just gets home from a long day of work and they're tired and they're exhausted, that might not be the time to just dump a whole bunch of stuff on them as soon as they walk through the door. Sometimes timing's critical for good communication. Taboo topics. It's really important that couples figure out if you've got any taboo topics in your relationship. Are there things that we don't talk about? Either because we're embarrassed about them or because we're just certain that this is going to lead to some kind of fight or conflict. Figure out what those taboo topics are, and then figure out, are they mountains or molehills? Because if they're mountains and they're getting ignored, then something somewhere down the line is going to create resentment in that. So work through those kind of things. And then phrasing. If there's two ways to say something and one way is healthy and helpful, pick that one over the one that's just matter of fact or maybe even a little critical or a little hostile. I was working with a couple a while back, and one of the things, anytime his wife would come to him with something going on, his response would be, well, there's nothing I can do about it. And factually, he was correct. There was nothing he could do about it. But I told him, I said, how about when she asks you or is sharing something with you, how about instead of, well, there's nothing I can do about it, which is dismissive and shuts her down, what if instead you just changed the phrasing and you said, what can I do to help? Same answer. There's nothing you can do to help. But that's inviting. And that's saying, I want to hear from you. I want to bless you in some way. See the difference? Phrasing's important. Verbal and nonverbal communication. Obviously, you guys understand this. A huge percentage of our communication with our spouse is nonverbal. What do we say with our looks? What do we say with our posturing? What do we say with our body language? Be aware of how you communicate nonverbally. One of the biggest things that I see with a lot of couples is an eye roll. And I'm going to tell you, if you roll your eyes at your spouse, stop. Okay? It's a habit, and it can be broken. But when we roll our eyes at our spouse, that's a very dismissive kind of gesture that communicates you're not important or what you're saying is not important. Now, if you've done that, I'm not coming down on you, okay? But it's a habit, and it can be changed. Sometimes just where we position ourselves with our spouse when we're within a group. I learned this one kind of the hard way not too very long ago because I'm much more of an extroverted personality. My wife's much more introverted. So on Sundays after Bible class, normally I'll talk to people. And you know, when you talk to people, you kind of naturally circle up, right? And one day after talking to people after class, we're heading out to the car, and my wife said, I wish you would quit doing that. I said, what? And she said, you're boxing me out. And I didn't realize I was doing it because, you know, again, she's introverted, so she doesn't talk a lot, but I'm sitting here talking to people, and she's standing right here behind me. And, man, light bulb moment. She said, I may not say anything, but I want to feel like I'm a part of the conversation, that I belong. And so, again, that nonverbal, the body language, that kind of thing becomes really important. And last thing on this, and then we got a couple more things that we're going to do real quick to wrap up, assumptions, okay? I know that there is a great deal of truth in that the longer you are married and the better you know your spouse, that probably you kind of can get to that point where you can finish their sentences, right? You just know them that well. Be careful with that, though. Because again, we don't stay stagnant. We grow, we change. Give your spouse the benefit of the doubt to say what they're going to say without assuming what they're going to say. Again, in the counseling room, one of the biggest things that I have to do is stop one of the spouses from finishing the other's sentence. Because by the time they're in counseling, it's usually finishing it in a negative way. But if we don't do that, if we back off from that as a matter of habit and we allow our spouse to say what they say and don't make assumptions, again, that's where a lot of really cool surprises can happen in that marriage relationship. Okay, really quickly, just some communication killers. Shallow listening. And again, I'm going to go through these really quick because we've talked about a lot of these. Shallow listening is where you can parrot back what they're saying, but you're not really hearing them. You're not hearing what's underneath. Yes, but communication. This is one of my favorites. This is when you do sit there and listen to your spouse say something, and as soon as they finish, you say, yes, but, and then say the exact opposite. The phrase, yes, but, and similar offenders, what they communicate is, yeah, I heard you, but you're all wrong. And so here's what's right. Now, that doesn't mean you and your spouse can't disagree, but validate what they said before you go to counterpoint. Okay? The next thing, pride and judgment. At any point in communication where you feel like you're on a high horse and you're looking down on your spouse and you are delivering divine information to them, or you're talking to them in a way that is demeaning and makes them feel judged, it's time to reevaluate a little bit. Distractions. We live in a world filled with distractions. And we got to be intentional about communicating without the distractions, putting the distractions down. Unbalanced communication, that's when communication is either all rational or all emotional, and both of those are important in healthy communication. Body language, we just talked about. Barbed comments. Barbed comments are those things where we say something nice about our spouse, but then there's always that backhanded slap to it. You know, she's the best cook in the world for somebody who cooks hog slop. And what it is, it's like running your hand down a barbed wire fence. You know, everything's fine till you, ow, hit one of those barbs. And then, okay, I'm going to try again. Ow, there it is again. I knew a couple that divorced after 30 years of marriage. Grown children, grandchildren, all this, they divorced after 30 years because she left him. And the reason she left him was because for 30 years he did that. He was all the time talking negatively about her looks, about her housekeeping, about her cooking, about everything. And it was always those little jokey comments. And he would always do it in crowds where everybody else would laugh, and she would laugh too. But any time that she said anything about it, his response was, oh, can't you take a joke? She got sick of it. And after 30 years, she said, I'm done with that. I'm done with being treated like that. So be aware, you know, in every relationship, humor is important, but make sure you're laughing with your spouse, not at your spouse, okay? And I know different households do different things different ways, and I grew up in a household filled with sarcasm. And every time me and my family get together, it's still there. But just being aware of, is that hurting your spouse on a deeper level than what you realize? Okay, basic communication skills, things we've talked about. Listen attentively, speak up, okay? Don't just assume that your spouse knows. Speak up, but speak only for yourself and speak kindly. Ask clarifying questions. Ask your spouse, what did you mean when you said that? Help me understand. Allow time for responses. Don't cut them off. Don't run ahead of them. Be attentive to eye contact, body language, physical touch. Limit or eliminate distractions as much as you can. Resist the impulse to interrupt, lecture, or give unsolicited advice. And by the way, one other thing that should be tagged on here that I don't think's on here is please don't use your prayer life together as a way to chastise your spouse. Dear Lord, please help Harold not to be so stubborn about this decision we're trying to make. That's abusive. Don't assume motivation. Unless your spouse clearly states, this is why I did that, we can make guesses, and sometimes we can make really good guesses. But again, give them that opportunity to speak for themselves and be who they are. And biggest thing of all on this, remember, you are one flesh, not competitors. And that whole idea in Genesis 1 and 2, particularly in chapter 2, of husband and wife being one flesh, what that means is I will never say or do anything to hurt you, because to hurt you is to hurt me. We are one. Okay? Last thing, and this is what we're going to close out with, 21st century communication. Back when cell phones started becoming more and more in the norm, and texting, that kind of thing, I fought it for a while. And I would go in and I would talk to groups and I would say, oh, no, you can't do that, and we need to get away from that and all that kind of thing. But here's the deal. You can't stop progress, okay? And when you look at the generation that's my kids and below, they are what are called digital natives. And what that means is they've grown up with this, and that is their native language, okay? Their native language is not the same as ours. A bunch of kids can stand around in youth group and be having a conversation while all of them are at the same time looking at Snapchat and Instagram and talking to each other back and forth across the circle, even as they're talking to each other back and forth across the circle. We can't escape where communication has come to. What I would tell you, though, is be very, very careful with electronic communication, whether it be email, text, Snapchat, Instagram, whatever else, because a couple of things. Number one is, through electronic communication, typically we only show the best of what's going on, and if we're not careful, that can lead to a whole lot of unfair comparisons. Man, how come every time I open up Facebook, Bobby and Judy are on some kind of trip, or they're going out to dinner, or they're doing this, or they're doing that? And it can create resentment toward our spouse, okay? Second thing is, when you get electronic communication, when we read that, we always read that through the disposition of what we are currently feeling, not necessarily what the person sending it is feeling or intending. And so all the time I'll have situations in the counseling room where, somebody will talk about how I can't believe the way my husband treated me, what he said to me in that text this morning. Okay, well, sounds bad. Can I see it? Well, he says, hey, I cleaned the kitchen before I went to work this morning. Yeah, can you believe he said that to me? What? That sounds good to me. No, we had a big fight last night about how he never helps me around the house. And so he's just shoving it in my face this morning. Or maybe he's trying to bless you and he actually heard what you were saying. It becomes very difficult with electronic communication to not misread a lot of things. And so, yeah, that's a part of our world, that's a part of our culture. But don't lose face-to-face relationship. Face-to-face relationship is where we build safety in our marriages, okay? That face-to-face, real person interaction. And I don't know what kind of policies you guys have within your family, but I've heard multiple times that technology, a fast from technology, is a wonderful thing. And one of the principles, I've got a good friend that the principle that he uses in his home, and his kids are all out now, but when they were growing up, is that they had at least 1 hour a day that everybody had it down. At least 1 hour a day that everybody had it down. At least 1 full day a week that everybody was off their devices. 1 weekend a month. And 1 full week a year. Now, again, can we do that? I don't know. I mean, you got to decide what you're going to do in your household. But I promise you that it will be a blessing for your children, for your grandchildren, if they can see that we can interact and communicate in other ways too. And so, again, communication is a very, very powerful thing, and it's part of who we are. It's part of our spiritual nature. John 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Genesis 1 and 2, God speaks creation into existence. There's something fundamentally powerful about word being heard, and that is what creates safety and value in your relationship. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about managing conflict. And, how do we do that effectively and in a way that honors God? So if you will, bow with me. And I want to give you one challenge before we end here. For those of you who are older, who have been married for a longer amount of time, or just age-wise you're older, even if you're maybe in a second marriage, look for a younger couple, maybe Sunday morning, and just talk to them. I promise you they're going to talk back to you. If you are a younger couple here, find one of these older couples and invite them out to coffee or to dinner or whatever you want to do. But spend some time beginning to invest in each other, okay? You guys have so much wisdom to share with each other and so much enthusiasm. Those of you who are older, you got the wisdom. Those of you who are younger, you still got that toe-tingling excitement going on in your marriage. Y'all might need to jumpstart some of these older couples a little bit. Or maybe they'll jumpstart you. Let's close with prayer. God, we thank you that you are a God of communication, that you have revealed yourself to us, that you've shared your word with us. And I pray, God, that we'll always practice our faith first at home, that when no unwholesome talk comes out of our mouths, when we say things that are meant to bless and build each other up, that we're always going to do that first with our spouses. And Father, I pray for those here who are single. I pray for those who are not yet married. Whatever the station in life, Father, help us to honor marriage as a way of building stability and of blessing each other and blessing the congregation and the community. And Lord, give us peace, give us joy, and give us hope. We pray this by the power of your Spirit in the name of Christ.